Hello, everybody. My name's Frank Norris. I'm a former HMI, and I'm joined by four other former HMIs, and we've been in contact with each other since we left the inspectorate. And we just thought it'd be quite nice just to spend 30 minutes or so just reminiscing or reflecting on our experiences in the early days as HMI. And hopefully people who are currently being appointed to HMI can see some of the differences in our experiences and those that are currently being experienced at the moment. So let's go around and introduce ourselves. So I'll just do it on the screen in front of me. So top left for me is Debbie. Do you want to introduce yourself, Debbie?
Hi there, everyone. My name is Debbie Clinton. I'm a former HMI. I'm currently working as an education leadership consultant and joined HMI after a lengthy tenure as a secondary head teacher up in the northeast of England.
Brilliant. Okay, and Julie?
Hi, I'm Julie Price Grimshaw. I came into Ofsted via teacher training. I ran a PGCE course at Manchester Met University, and I was inspected myself and then got a chance to join what was then the teacher education division. And I'm a teacher of music. I ran music PGCE and I also teach English.
Fabulous. Meena?
I was a former HMI up until 2014. And I joined at a time before Ofsted was as it is now. So I joined at a time when we had a post-continuing education division and we had a schools division, and obviously we had other divisions as well. I came from schools. I was working in schools, then I moved into further education, which is why I went into the post-continuing education division. I was principal of an adult college before I joined Ofsted, and my subjects that I've taught along the way have been languages, for French and English. My specialism is in literacy and EAL, ESOL, and so on.
Brilliant. Thank you. And Adrian?
So my name's Adrian Gray. I joined Ofsted after a career in secondary education. Actually, I'd just gone from a school that was judged outstanding into a school that immediately failed its inspection. And after 2 years, I thought that was hard work. What else can I do? So I ended up in Ofsted for 12 years or so in various roles, including my favourite bit, which was being the England representative on the European group that looked at school inspections. That was fascinating. It gave me a bit of a wider insight.
Yeah. And I was a primary head teacher of two schools. And in the mid-90s, when Ofsted was short of inspectors, it was a privilege. I had a year's secondment into the inspectorate, and I was mentored by somebody who then became, over time, the chief inspector. And I then joined in 2001 and got involved in framework development. So I left in 2012. So that's a little summary of where we've come from. I mean, can we just have a chat, folks, about how did you feel? Why did you apply for HMI role? And how did you feel when you got it? Who's going to kick off?
Do you want me to start?
Go on then.
I think the first thing I can remember is being a bit annoyed that my salary only went up by 10%.
Yeah, mine did as well.
And having come from a secondary school that was cash strapped on a rather suppressed salary, I felt that I was much worse off than everybody else I've worked with. However, I mean, I applied in answer to an advert for a subject specialist as to do history, and then I never ever did any history apart from I think one or two little bits, because I was put into the school improvement division, and actually that was because of my experience of having come from a failing school, and actually proved to be fascinating because we were a team of about 30 people who specialised in all the schools that had failed their inspection, supporting schools in special measures. And it was a really brilliant introduction to the challenges in education at that time. And we would do 2 visits a week. So it wasn't the case of just doing one inspection every now and again. We were in 2 different schools every week, one in which you led and the other in which you were a team member. And I think that built up a huge reservoir of expertise in the team, because everybody had seen everything. And also a real great strength in the team, because you really knew your colleagues. You were working with the same people regularly. Unfortunately, that was destroyed by the regionalisation, and that sort of strength in specialism, I don't think has ever come back again.
Yeah. What about others?
I answered Sir Michael Wilshaw's clarion call for outstanding head teachers to join HMI, and I did so because I really wanted. We'd led our then school to outstanding in every aspect in that framework and various other accolades, but I think I wanted to understand more how we had done it, and wanted to use my experiences in Ofsted to gain a deeper systemic understanding of school improvement, actually. And it delivered in spades, and enabled me, in the way that Adrian described, to widen I think, quite a narrow frame of reference into a much, much broader, confident understanding of exactly, what works and what doesn't. And they were very good days indeed.
What about you, Meena? Meena, your routine was slightly different, wasn't it?
Yes, it was. So it was in 2002. I started off in schools and then moved into working as a modern languages teacher, and then moved into further education and adult learning, then further education, and became principal of a outstanding adult college, Lewisham College, actually, in South London, which was outstanding at that time. And so I got to the point where I felt I wanted to I think like Debbie and like Adrian and possibly I think all of us wanted a broader view of the landscape, if you like, the education landscape. And I wanted to experience that. And certainly going into the post-continuing education division as it was then, which was very separate to schools, I certainly experienced that. However, I was thrown in at the deep end, very much, I think, probably like the HMI are today. And literally 2 days after I started, I had my first inspection, which was an area-wide inspection, which we used to do in those days, which covered schools and colleges. So I did the whole area of Islington, and that was, my first experience. And then after that, I moved into, I did youth services, Connections, which was the careers advisory service, and youth offenders institutes, prisons, and various other institutes, really, which, were straddling sort of the adult and sort of post-16 provision. The funniest part was when it came to 2005, where we had to make a choice between actually whether we stayed with FE or we moved into schools. And I thought, right, well, I started off in schools, so I'm going to go back into schools. So I made a decision to go back into schools. And but the first school I ever did, and I was petrified, and that was in 2005, I graded special measures. And it was the most horrific experience of my life, not because I graded it as special measures, but I was scared. I'd had no induction into inspecting schools on my own, leading on it. But actually, it turned out the best thing, because the school was Bethnal Green and they needed to be put into special
Right.
at that time.
Wow.
And then went on to become outstanding. So that was a good move for me, and from there on I carried on working with schools, but I also worked with colleagues from the colleges sector to do anything that required thematic service. I did quite a lot of thematic surveys, which used to do, because I was the lead for ESOL, EAL, and so on, and equalities as well, when I moved into the school sector. So that actually, for me, was one of the best bits of the work I did, that and the school improvement side of it, because it meant it was a privilege to be able to go into schools and colleges up and down the country, gathering good practice and framing it into a survey or a report, which actually had brilliant consequences, because what you could do, go into a school which was failing when you're inspecting, and actually be able to say, in those days you could say, well, have you looked at these schools, which you could go and look at the good practice. To me, that developmental aspect of being an HMI in those days was absolutely key, and I loved every minute of it, to be honest. As I said, it was a privilege. So yeah.
Julie, what about you?
Well, I was in my dream job at Manchester Met University. I was running the PGC secondary music course. At the time, it was a big course of 50 trainees a year. And I also worked cross-fair, so I worked on the primary undergraduate course and music specialism. And it was a fixed-term contract of 3 years with a 95% chance that it was going to be made permanent. And in my last year at MMU, I was inspected. Now, people don't believe me when I say this, but in those days, the inspection of teacher training providers, your HMI, and they were always HMI leads, were with you for a year, not constantly, but they made 3 or 4 visits across the year. So, you know, you didn't know the outcome of the inspection for a year, but it was a fantastic experience. So I had a super knowledgeable HMI. I was just in awe of her. She was just absolutely brilliant. Every visit was, let's talk about what you've done. Oh, I've been to this school, and how about doing this? Have you thought about doing this? It was genuinely developmental stuff. It was inspection. We did get graded. The course got outstanding, so that was smashing. I was then thinking, suppose they don't make my job here permanent. And I got an email from her saying, there's going to be an advert going out. I don't have very much to do with it, but I think you should apply. And I just thought, wow, to do the job that she's doing, which is going around and spending this time with teacher trainers, this is fantastic. This is even better than what I've got now. And that's why I applied. And yeah, it was phenomenal. It was absolutely amazing.
I mean, I'm interested in when you joined, as to the culture you experienced those first few weeks. I mean, how did that feel? I've got some definite, clear sense. I have a sense of imposter syndrome about it, to be honest. How did it feel for you when you joined? You know, and you had a mentor. You would have had a mentor, or perhaps you wouldn't, Meena. I don't know. Did you have a mentor? No. But
no, I did have a mentor. I had Vivian Bailey, but the problem with the mentor at that point, unlike now, or unlike when you were doing it, was it wasn't really a mentor as such. Though you touch base with them if something was going wrong.
Very wrong, yeah.
Quite a way to do it, the deficit model. Mentors should be having regular meetings with you before things went wrong, you know. So it was just simple things like a lack of familiarity with the framework, for example, or new and needing that sort of phone call. And it shouldn't be like that, you know. I should have the induction.
No, because actually I think I had a very different experience. You know, I mean, I'd been inspecting I'd done that year. I'd carried on inspecting. I must have had about 30 inspections under my belt, but I wasn't allowed to inspect as an HMI until I'd proved, in a sense, that I had it's more to do with the way that you manage yourself and the way you conduct yourself when you meet senior leaders in other settings. You know, I don't know if that's the same sort of feeling for you. I mean, who wants to go? I mean, Debbie, do you want to explain what your induction felt like and what it involved and how the culture was when you joined?
I think the culture, I mean, I always say 2 things about my Ofsted experience. The first comment is that I think as I've already alluded to, I joined a cadre of professionals, which was just staggeringly high quality, and never had I worked with such a force of intellect and understanding and ability. It was just amazing. But I hated being a civil servant with all of the nonsense that came with that. So that's partly why I ended up, you know, going into the MAT world afterwards. But in terms of the induction, it was the best induction I have ever experienced at any point in my career. It was wide-ranging. The mentor, I'm guessing we're not going to use names here, but my mentor was inspirational. I learned how to write, which I always think, you know, sounds a bit of a glib comment, but I thought I was a brilliant writer until I became an HMI. And then I realised, oh dear. And I have to say that ever since my experiences, I'm now renowned as, you know, an even better writer, which is a great accolade, and I'm very proud of that. And what I would say as well was and Meena hinted at this earlier, the camaraderie, and it's not, I mean, it was quite cozy and loving and all the things that you want it to be, but it was more than that. It was about mutual respect and challenge that was always there. And so when you know, I mean, you weren't let loose on inspections for ages. I didn't do my first lead until my 5th month, I think. So it was a very, very prolonged period of induction. But of course, that period entailed you shadowing and then teaming, and it was incredibly comprehensive, actually. And it meant that, and also I think, you know, by the end of my induction period, I decided who I was going to emulate and who I wasn't going to emulate. So the breadth of people that I worked with really enabled me to hone my own skills. So, and finally, I actually have used elements of my Ofsted induction in my subsequent career as a recruiter of people, because I just thought it was really powerful.
What about you, Adrian?
Well, I mean, I certainly had a mentor in the school improvement division, and so you did your first couple of visits with that person, and then you went to other schools with other members of the team, and that was really good because it gave you a wide view of what other inspectors were like, and beginning, I think certainly some of them were quite awe-inspiring. You were very impressed. Over time, you worked out actually 1 or 2 who perhaps were the wild cards who weren't quite so impressive. And then you eventually realised, well, actually, I can do this as well. I think the really important skills, writing was certainly an interesting one. I mean, you look at the reports now and you think they were written by AI with a limited memory capacity, don't you? AI is not an assistant inspector, by the way. So there's you know, and there's actually quite a bit of you've got to make the grade. So it was quite pressurized. Your writing's not good enough, and a few people had real troubles with not being considered able to write. I think the thing that you learned was how to be analytical and focus on what mattered, and you learned how to get a message across properly. And you know, one of the best things I ever learned really was how to get a school into special measures without anyone seeming upset about it. And, you know, and I can remember one inspection where the head teacher simply said, "Well, I suppose we need to go into special measures." And, you know, we didn't actually even have to say it to him because the inspection was so well delivered and so professional that it wasn't open to debate. I mean, there was a certain downside at times that some people were a little bit arrogant. And can I tell a little story?
I can agree with this. Go on.
So this is an interesting story. So one of my early inspections, I was with one other HMI, and he was going through the issues in the feedback, and he missed out the bit that I was going to do. So I foolishly said, "Oh, and what about this bit?" And later on, when we got out to the car park, he said to me, "Never interrupt an HMI when he's doing his feedback." And I thought, well. Anyway, a few weeks later, I went on another inspection with him. And at the end of the inspection, we got out to the car park and he said, "Well, how do you think that went?" And I said, "Well, that was okay, but I was interested that you didn't cover this and this and this." "Didn't I?" he said. "Why didn't you tell me?" And there was a little bit of that. But you know, the training that I got was through being exposed to very, very challenging school situations with people who had a range of different expertise and which you could learn from. And I think it's that depth of experience. And half the time you look at the inspection day and think, well, had it been handled differently, it might have gone better. And that's through the exposure to seeing what works and actually what doesn't work. Because in our team, we'd had a couple of unfortunate incidents where things had gone wrong and court cases had set off. And there was an awareness of that. and what we can learn from it. And I thought that was important. I don't hear much of that type of discussion these days.
No. What about you, Julie?
Well, I ended up having two mentors, not because the first one couldn't stand me, although, you know, she might have felt like that, but she actually joined the primary division. So I then had a mentor from my last term from teacher education. But the first mentor, yeah, she was a primary specialist, early reading specialist, and also early years. And she said, I've got this, you know, this plan for all the things I want you to do. And we're going to go everywhere and see everything. And you're going to go to Germany and inspect, you know, a Mönchengladbach on the garrison there. And you're going to go to Blackpool and with the school division, you're going to see what they do, and you're going to go all over the place. And it was phenomenal. And she said, is there something you really want to find out more about? And I said, yeah, I want to find out more about early years. Right, I can arrange for you to have hands-on experience in early years. And she did it. And you know, it was amazing, because I was getting experience that I wouldn't otherwise have had a chance to do. But school improvement division, and thinking about what Adrian was saying there, I remember working with an incredible HMI who was in school improvement, and flowers were being delivered to her from schools that she'd supported, and that was the relationship. And what I picked up was, it was never a sort of cozy, over familiar relationship, but they worked with those schools. They built relationships with those schools. They knew the context, they knew the challenges, and they were the very best people to move those schools on. And I was hugely impressed with it. And the other thing that occurred to me thinking this week, some things that stuck with me from training sessions on induction. One was the thing, I said it before, being told several times, never forget you're dealing with human beings. Never forget that this is another day at work for you, and for them it's something really, really special. And then the other day I remembered somebody saying, you've got to leave your personal preferences at the door, because the minute we become prescriptive rather than evaluative, we've lost our core purpose, and
Absolutely.
it won't end well.
Yeah.
And those things are particularly pertinent now.
As a history geography teacher, when I started going to primary school inspections, I actually stopped going to history geography lessons for that reason, because it's too easy from my perspective of greater experience to judge other people in their context.
Yeah, I mean, my brother, who is not very well at the moment and is sort of reflecting on his career as an HMI, produced a sort of chart of issues that he used for inducting new HMI into Estin. And he said, remember the irritating success of the wrong method. And, you know, I have to say that, which is all around that preferred practice issue, isn't it? About, you know, you'll see a variety of things, you know, and you'll struggle at times to understand, why is this so successful? Because you'd need to spend a long period of time to really get underneath the skin of it. Yeah, but just accept that it's successful.
Yeah.
The fact that it's not done the way you want to do it, that doesn't mean to say that it's wrong, that it's bad, you know.
When I've done peer reviews with groups of head teachers, for example, you notice that there's a type of head teacher who finds it really difficult to get out of that, well, I wouldn't do it like this method. And because that's a danger when that gets into inspection. But that's why you need good training to get that out of people.
Yeah.
And actually enough experience, so when you start to be responsible, you don't do that.
If I can just bring this, because we've got about 4 or 5 minutes to go. It's funny how this time slips by very quickly, isn't it? But I seem to remember there being quite a lot of challenge from HMI. I remember going to national conferences, and there being, say, a couple of hundred HMI listening to the chief inspector, and the chief inspector actually expecting there to be pushback, and for that pushback to be made quite visibly, without people feeling as though, initially I thought, oh, that's a pretty brave statement to make, but then I realized, actually, this is the culture. It's sometimes unpleasant, but actually this is actually, by pushing back in that way, a strength of the culture because it actually was a desire to make sure that we got whatever the project was right. You know, so
that's so true, Frank. And I think I certainly experienced that. I mean, as I've already alluded to, I found the civil service elements and the kind of doublethink bits a bit frustrating at times. But what is absolutely true is that there was a definite culture where mutual challenge in a warmth and appropriate atmosphere was absolutely welcomed, and including at the very top. And I can remember being inspired by the then Chief Inspector, because actually I could see that it was someone who, yes, understood school improvement intrinsically, but going back to Adrian's point of a moment ago, understood that there are many ways the school improvement cat can be skinned. And it was really important that we understood that and appreciated that. I have to say, I don't detect that same culture now within the organisation.
Meena, did you notice that when you joined, a sort of willingness to challenge and that being quite visible?
Yeah, oh, absolutely. Both when I was working in college inspections and especially when I started working with schools, I always found that pretty remarkable that when you worked with HMI, if the two of you were on inspection, for example, and one was leading and the other was co-leading or whatever, that you had that quite vigorous debate around, judgments and so on, evidence base. And I think I'll come back to, Adrian's point about some of the OIs, as they're called now, but AIs in those days, but not AI as in artificial intelligence, as we made earlier on that point. The head teachers or the senior lead would definitely start reporting back on their own experience in schools. And that wasn't necessarily very helpful. But what was helpful was when you had impartiality and a lack of bias and people being able to look at that evidence base very objectively and to be able to arrive at those conclusions that you needed to arrive in the best interests of the school. And for me, I know people were saying what advice they got when they first joined. I'll always remember an HMI in the PSED division who said to me, Meena, for me, whenever I'm on inspection, I've got a little child sitting on my shoulder and I am the advocate for that child. And that's how I see every school inspection. I want the best interest for that child. And that has stayed with me, well, over the 12 years as an HMI, but then way beyond that after, since I left in 2014. And I think, sadly, the culture now, although the current HMCI says it is in the best interest, inspection is in the best interest of children, I don't see the proof of the pudding when I see some schools actually being downgraded or other schools not getting the right grade for whatever reason, and children, as a result, not getting that decent quality education that they should get because, and I think this is, for me, a major problem here now, is that there isn't an equal scrutiny of outcomes and curriculum within the school inspection. So, various groups of pupils, which we used to look at very, very closely and how they achieved, are now underachieving, or we don't even know how they're achieving, but it is disadvantaging the most vulnerable pupils in our schools. So I think for me, that's complete antithesis of why I went in to become an HMI and the advice I was given when I was an HMI, which is the best advice I'd ever had.
Well, I know one thing, Adrian, well, I won't point at Adrian, but I think there's currently a vacancy for a chief inspector. I assume that none of you are applying.
Frank, that is my dream job.
Is
my
it?
Absolute dream job. But one of the criteria was that you had to agree not to fundamentally change the current framework. There's no way I could have applied under those circumstances.
Good for you, Dan.
So if we were appointing the new chief inspector then, I mean, what would you be looking for in that person? Should we go round and then that will bring this sort of discussion to an end? So, Adrian, do you want to kick off?
Well, I've run an opinion poll on my LinkedIn, as you know, Frank, and I think we looked at Dracula, Wackford Squeers, Jesus, and the 1950s version of the Head of St. Trinian's. And I'm able to report to you that the 1950s Head of St. Trinian's got the best vote. Partly because people thought that actually this would be quite entertaining, and because the type of chief inspector who's somewhat eccentric with particular views in particular areas is because characteristic of what we've tended to appoint, isn't it?
Meena, can you follow that?
Very, very poorly. I think I can follow that one. That is just brilliant. HMCI, the next HMCI. Well, I think coming back to Debbie's point, I think the next HMCI should take a look at the framework, seriously take a look at the framework for the reasons I mentioned just now, and to start genuinely looking at the best interests of each and every pupil in a school, and not to keep following some political dogma, which is there at the moment, I'm afraid.
Julie?
I would say HMCA has to be committed to the restoration of HMI as a body of experts with specialist knowledge, not this, oh, you're an HMI, you can inspect, or you know why, you can inspect anything. You can apply your knowledge to any sphere of education. I don't believe that. This idea of people who were the leading thinkers, who were open-minded, gathering together evaluative stuff. You know, the recent controversial market review, we wouldn't have needed that in the old days, because the DFE would have just gone to HMI and said, what do you know about teacher training with regard to this, and they would have had it on the desks within a couple of weeks. And I want a restoration of that sort of role, subject reviews. We can look at how we inspect schools as part of that, but definitely that's what would be at the top of my list.
Can I have a footnote in there, Frank?
Of course.
My answer was a bit facetious. I think somebody who knows schools and inspection, the two things, is very important. I'd actually think, well, maybe we ought to look outside England for somebody with expertise in a different system, because I don't see anyone in the current system who can get out of the fact that they've been associated with the previous problems. So why not look at somebody in Ireland, Wales, Scotland, Europe, elsewhere, and let's have some genuine international perspective.
Yes,
I agree.
would second that.
Yeah.
And think outside the box. That's what I would like to see happening.
Debbie?
The chief inspector that I worked with imprinted many useful bits of guidance on me, and he always talked about speaking truth to power. I see too little of that at the moment. And it would be really good to have somebody with appropriate background. Everything that everybody said, by the way, I absolutely agree with. That's a given in this anecdote. But I do think that we need a chief inspector that is self-confident, self-assured, with an experienced background that enables them to do that speaking truth to power part of the job, which is so key.
Well, that's a fascinating 35 minutes of reminiscing on for me, you're probably one of the proudest moments in my professional career was to be appointed as an HMI, and still look back on it with great fondness. And the fact that we still meet and chat and communicate with each other is a sign. I tend not to do that quite so much with other people that I've worked with in the past. You know, it's just it gets into your blood, all of this. So I hope you've all enjoyed listening to us, and who knows, if you're keen to hear some more about, well, what did you do when you became an HMI? I'm sure we could find 30 minutes or so to cover that in a follow-up film. So thank you for watching, everybody, and thanks for your time, everybody.
Thank you, Frank.
Yeah.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.